And so, ladies and gentlemen, Leo's voice thundered through the microphone, steady and full of pride. The soft hum of background chatter died almost instantly. The sound traveled across the grand hall of the Northwood Club, a room glowing in amber light with chandeliers glittering above polished mahogany tables. Gold rimmed glasses clinked softly as guests turned toward the stage. Leo stood there, my son, my only son, tall and composed, wearing a midnight blue suit that fit him perfectly. His tie, a deep burgundy, caught the light like a vein of fire. I watched him from the front table, the so called guest of honor. My chest swelled with pride. Despite all our differences, despite the distance that had slowly grown between us, there were moments like these when I could still see my little boy. The boy who once brought me wilted daisies from the garden. The boy who used to sleep clutching his favorite stuffed bear after a nightmare. The boy who, even as a man, still had that nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth whenever he was about to make an emotional speech. Today, Leo continued, on my 35th birthday, I want to thank someone very special, the person who gave me everything I have. The woman who raised me, taught me, believed in me when no one else did. He paused, smiling faintly as his voice softened. My mother, Eleanor. There was a murmur of polite applause. Some even turned to look at me, nodding approvingly. I smiled gently, keeping my back straight, my hands folded neatly on my lap. The warmth in my chest was real fragile, but real. No matter how far apart life had taken us this moment, this public acknowledgement made every lonely evening worth it. Then Chloe stepped into the spotlight beside him. She was breathtaking as always, in that carefully calculated way that left no room for authenticity. Her hair was pulled into an elegant bun, not a single strand out of place. The diamond earrings glittered like tiny ice shards. Her smile, perfect, practiced, camera ready, widened as she took Leo's arm. Leo is right, she said, her tone sweet as honey, but her eyes, sharp and assessing, glinted with something far colder. We owe Eleanor so much. Her support, her patience. I felt a subtle tightening in my chest. That word patience lingered in the air like a drop of poison. Chloe's voice rang through the hall, gentle yet commanding. As everyone here knows, Eleanor lives alone in a large, beautiful house. She placed her manicured hand on her heart, feigning concern. A house that's far too big for a woman her age to manage. We've talked about this so many times, haven't we, Leo? Leo hesitated. He didn't answer. The crowd shifted uneasily. The clinking of glasses stopped. I could feel the shift in the air, a slow turn from admiration to curiosity to discomfort. Leo and I are planning for our future, Chloe continued smoothly, her voice sugar-coated yet heavy with implication. We're thinking about family, about children. We need space, a fresh start. And tonight, surrounded by everyone we love, we want to ask Eleanor for a very special birthday gift. She turned toward me now, the softness of her voice dissolving into something sharper. Mother, please give us the keys to your house. It's time for you to move somewhere more suitable. The words hit me like a slap. The room went silent. No one moved. Even the air seemed to grow heavy, thick with unspoken judgment. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, some pitying, some curious, others whispering silently. What will she do? My throat tightened. I tried to swallow, but couldn't. Leo stood there frozen, his gaze fixed on the floor. He couldn't even look at me. I managed a small smile, the kind you wear when you're trying not to crumble. I folded my napkin carefully, pretending to straighten my silverware as though her words had been a misunderstanding. Surely this was some twisted joke. But then Chloe's voice rose again, no longer sugar, only venom. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard, she snapped when she saw my silence. After everything we've done for you, the room gasped. Before I could react, she lunged forward, wine glass in hand. There was a sharp, deliberate motion, an accident too precise to be real, and in the next instant, the contents of her glass splashed across my cream-colored silk dress. The dark red liquid spread like blood blooming across snow. Oh my goodness! Chloe gasped theatrically, stepping back, eyes wide in mock horror. You see, you can't even take care of yourself anymore. You've ruined our evening. A collective murmur rippled through the guests, but no one came forward. No one offered a napkin. No one spoke up. Leo's face was pale blank, the face of a man caught between fear and shame. My son, my only child, who once clung to my hand crossing the street, stood rooted in place, mute, powerless, while his wife humiliated me in front of everyone. For a long moment, I sat there staring at the spreading stain. I thought of the nights I'd stayed awake by his bedside when he had fevers, the birthday cakes I'd baked from scratch, the stories I'd read aloud until my voice went hoarse. And now this, something inside me shattered, then I froze. I rose slowly, my chair scraping softly against the marble floor. I could feel the weight of every gaze stabbing into my back. I didn't look at Chloe. I didn't look at Leo. I walked toward the exit, each step echoing in the silence. Outside the ballroom, the night air hit my skin like a revelation. From my old leather purse, the one Chloe once mocked as vintage trash, I pulled out my phone. My hands trembled, but my will did not. I dialed a number I hadn't touched in over a year. Mr. Hister Harrison, I said when the voice answered. This is Eleanor Vance. I need you to come to the Northwood Club immediately. Bring the Plan B file. It's time. There was a pause, then his measured voice came through. Are you certain, Mrs. Vance, once this begins, there's no turning back? I turned to glance at the ballroom one last time through the glass doors. Inside, Chloe was surrounded by her friends feigning distress. Leo stood beside her, his head bowed, his hand resting weakly on her shoulder. Yes, I said softly, my voice steady now. I'm sure. 30 minutes, Mr. Harrison. No more. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not rage, not sorrow, clarity. They had taken me for a fool. Now they were about to meet the woman I truly was, the real Eleanor Vance. 2.5 years earlier, autumn had just begun to paint the world in shades of gold and rust. Outside my window, the sycamores were shedding their leaves in soft, spiraling patterns, fragile, fleeting, yet beautiful in their surrender. The air carried that crisp chill that hinted at the coming winter, and with it a quiet loneliness that settled into my bones. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I'd spent the morning watering my plants, tidying the bookshelves, and baking a small apple pie. Old habits, remnants of a time when the house had been filled with noise, with laughter, with the comforting mess of family life. When I opened the door, my heart skipped a beat. Leo stood there, my boy, smiling like the sun had come home. His hair was neatly styled now, a few gray strands at the temples that made him look older, more serious. But it was his eyes that caught me still, the same hazel hue still carrying that familiar spark. Mom, he said, his voice soft but excited, I want you to meet someone very special. And then she appeared. Chloe. She stepped forward, extending a manicured hand and a dazzling smile that somehow didn't touch her eyes. Mrs. Vance, she said, her tone syrupy sweet. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you. Leo has told me so much about you. I took her hand. It was cool, too cool. Her grip was firm, practiced. A handshake meant to impress, not connect. Come in, I said, forcing a smile. Make yourselves at home. As they entered, Chloe's gaze swept across my living room, not with curiosity, but with appraisal. Her eyes lingered on every detail, the floral curtains I'd sewn decades ago, the framed photographs on the mantel, the stack of old books on the coffee table. I saw it then, the flicker of disdain that crossed her face before she masked it with another bright smile. How cozy, she murmured. It was a simple phrase, but in her tone it sounded like quaint, like outdated. Leo didn't notice. Of course he didn't. He was busy fussing over her coat, making sure she was comfortable, offering her tea. I served the apple pie I'd just baked, still warm from the oven. The scent of cinnamon filled the room. Oh, I shouldn't, Chloe said quickly, her hand brushing the air as if warding off sin. I'm on a meal plan. I nodded quietly, cutting 2 slices instead of 3. She watched me as I moved, her gaze darting from the modest furniture to the kitchen tiles that hadn't been replaced in years. So I said gently, trying to break the uneasy silence, how did you two meet? At a charity gala, Chloe said with a smile that gleamed like polished glass. Leo was helping organize the event. I was on the planning committee. Chloe's very active in community work, Leo added proudly. She volunteers at the art museum and runs her own consulting business. Image consulting, Chloe clarified, crossing one elegant leg over the other. I help people find the version of themselves that makes the world listen. Her words lingered in the air, and though she spoke lightly, there was something in her tone, something sharp beneath the surface. When she asked about me, her questions were polite but precise, as though she were checking boxes on a form. Do you live here alone? Isn't it a lot of space for just one person? Do you manage the house yourself? That must be difficult. Then came the question that made me pause. So, how do you manage on a widow's pension, Eleanor? She asked, using my first name as though we were equals. It must be hard keeping a place like this running on such a limited income. I met her eyes across the table. Her expression was sympathetic, but her pupils didn't lie. They were studying me, measuring, calculating. I smiled faintly. I've learned to be resourceful, I said. You'd be surprised how little one really needs to live well. Leo chuckled, not sensing the undercurrent. Mom's always been thrifty. She could stretch $1 until it begged for mercy. We all laughed, but only one of us meant it. After they left that afternoon, I stood by the window watching as they walked down the street hand in hand. Leo's voice carried back to me, warm, adoring. Chloe's laughter followed, melodic but hollow. I wanted to be happy for him, I really did. But something about that woman, something about the way she'd looked around my home, not with affection but with possession, it unsettled me. Over the following months, they visited often, and with every visit, I learned something new, not about Chloe's heart, but about her intentions. She brought catalogs of furniture. You deserve something more modern, Eleanor, she would say, running her fingers along my old wooden chair. This antique style, it's charming, but maybe it's time for an update. Other times she'd bring real estate brochures folded neatly and just for fun. These retirement communities are lovely, she said, once spreading the glossy pages across my coffee table. They take care of everything, cleaning, meals, social events. You wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes, they gleamed every time she said retirement. I played along, I smiled, nodded, feigned interest. But inside I was listening, observing. She wasn't offering me comfort. She was building a case. Then one afternoon, when Leo went to the bathroom, I overheard her whispering in the kitchen. Yes, Mom, she said softly. It's perfect. The apartment's in a prime neighborhood. If we can convince her to move, we could stay here while we save up. She's harmless. She'll think we're doing her a favor. The words sliced through me like ice. When she returned, she found me pouring tea, calm as ever. I didn't confront her. Not yet. You don't challenge a snake when it's coiled. You watch where it slithers. Over time, Chloe's tactics grew bolder. The suggestions became pressure. You shouldn't be alone, Eleanor. It's too much house for you. What if something happens and no one finds out? Leo echoed her word for word. Mom, Chloe's right. Maybe it's time to think about the future. The future, their future. The subtle manipulation became a steady drip, a constant erosion of my independence, my dignity. And though I stayed silent inside, I was preparing. One evening, after another visit filled with veiled comments and rehearsed concern, I called an old friend, David, a realtor I'd known since my husband passed. David, I said quietly, I need a favor. Look into someone for me, a couple, Leo Vance and Chloe Sterling. Tell me everything. 2 days later, he called back. Eleanor, he said, his tone grave, you should sit down. Chloe and Leo were drowning in debt. Credit cards, unpaid rent car loans, wedding expenses. They owed more than $150,000. Their income couldn't cover half of what they spent, and worse, they had already defaulted on payments for their apartment. That was the night the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They didn't want to help me. They wanted to replace me. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the framed photo of Leo as a boy missing front-tooth dirt-stained shirt grinning proudly beside his father's old fishing pole. When did my boy, the boy who used to cry when he saw me tired, become this stranger? And yet a part of me still wanted to believe there was hope, that if I just stayed quiet, patient, loving, he would wake up. He would see her for what she was. But deep down I knew the truth. The war had already begun. And I, the woman they thought was weak, had just decided I would not lose. The invitation arrived as a text disarmingly cheerful, followed by a cascade of celebratory emojis that tried too hard to be warm. We should do a family meeting, Chloe wrote, Sunday afternoon. Just to talk about the future, I'll bring macarons. The word future caught in my throat like a fishbone. Sunday came with a thin, indecisive light, the kind that makes every surface look a shade paler than it really is. I opened the windows early more out of instinct than intention, letting the room breathe. The house felt alert, as if it too sensed what was coming. They arrived not as a couple, but as a procession. Chloe first perfectly ironed and faintly perfumed. Leo half a step behind her, hands full of a glossy pastry box and a bouquet that looked ashamed of its own extravagance. And then Chloe's parents, Marjorie and Charles Sterling, walking in like owners returning to check on a rental. Eleanor, thank you for having us. Marjorie said, her smile tight as fresh stitches. She glanced past me into the living room, not looking, measuring. What a charming place. Charles nodded as he stepped in, producing a polite harumph that sounded like a number muttered under breath. He had an appraiser's gaze and a banker's posture. Well kept, he said, and I could feel him adding columns in his head, square footage, neighborhood, market velocity. Mom, Leo said, and for a moment his voice was almost tender. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, and I let my hand rest on his sleeve, a heartbeat longer than necessary, a quiet, foolish plea. Remember me. We settled in the living room. The house did what houses do when they have to defend their people. It made itself smaller, intimate. Afternoon light fell through the lace curtains, painting the rug with patterns I knew by heart. On the mantel, the photographs remained where they had always been. My husband at the Lake Leo on his 6th birthday, with frosting on his chin, our small trio arranged like a constellation that had once felt permanent. Chloe set the macaron box on the coffee table with ceremonial care. She chose the seat by Leo and angled her body just enough to center the conversation around her. Marjorie sat where my husband used to read the paper, and Charles took the armchair Leo favored when he watched Sunday football. It was not lost on me that in staging a scene you choose your marks. We're grateful you made time for this. Marjorie began smoothing her skirt. We didn't want to blindside you. The line was generous, considering that blindside was precisely the strategy. Chloe folded her hands, a study in poised compassion. Eleanor, we've been thinking a lot about what's best for you. For all of us. Leo nodded late to his own agreement. We want to make sure you're okay, Mom. I am okay, I said, and I watched the words land like a small, inconvenient fact. Chloe's smile deepened by a fraction. Of course, but it can be hard to admit when things are changing. We've done research. She nudged a bag by her feet and pulled out a neat stack of brochures: retirement living, assisted care, community based, senior wellness. The paper smelled like hotel lobbies. We found some wonderful places. Marjorie took over, smoothly sliding the pamphlets toward me with 2 fingers as if dealing cards. You'd be surprised how much freedom these communities offer. No maintenance, no heavy lifting, warm meals, social activities, on-site nurses. Frankly, it's safer. And smarter, Charles added. He reached into his leather folio and extracted a folder with tabs in 3 colors. We've crunched some numbers. I watched the folder make its way to the coffee table, settling like a small, tidy accusation. Leo shifted, restless. Mom, please just hear them out. Chloe began. You live alone in a large house. It's beautiful, but it's a lot to manage, and She glanced at Leo, then back to me with an earnest tilt of the head. We're planning for a family. We need space, a fresh start. There it was, the thesis cloaked as concern. I didn't reach for the brochures. I didn't reach for the folder. I let the silence bloom, patient and inconvenient. Charles, mistaking silence for assent, cleared his throat. The market is favorable for sellers in this neighborhood. If you listed now, you could easily secure enough to fund a long runway of care. At say $3,000 a month for a high-end facility, liquidating this property would more than cover decades. Marjorie finished smiling, and there'd be enough left to help Leo and Chloe settle. Weddings are expensive, and it's a crucial time for them to build, Chloe said softly, to start right. I looked at Leo. He was studying the seam of the macaron box with the intensity of a man reading a verdict. He did not meet my eyes. And if I say no, I asked. Chloe's smile faltered, then recovered. We're not here to force you, Eleanor. We're here to help you, to protect you from risks, loneliness, falls, mistakes. Marjorie folded her hands. Decisions get harder as we age. It's simply humane to have a plan. A plan for my house, I said. A plan for your safety, Charles corrected smoothly. and for your estate to be managed responsibly. The word estate felt like an insult in my living room. An estate is something you speak of when its owner is no longer in earshot. I inhaled slowly, sorting threads: anger, grief, memory, love. The trick I had learned was to braid them, not let anyone choke the rest. Do you remember, I said to Leo, ignoring the folder, when your father taught you to patch the gutter? You were 10. You cried because the ladder shook and you said the sky was too loud. The memory found me as clear as the day itself, the rain starting my husband's laugh, the three of us soaked and ridiculous and invincible. We fixed it anyway. Leo's mouth twitched the ghost of a smile, then it was gone. Eleanor, Chloe said gently, as if I had wandered off topic, "This isn't about gutters, it's about capacity." There it was, the second thesis, less clothed than the first. Marjorie adjusted the pearl at her throat. "No one is questioning your independence. We're only saying that if things change, if your mental health were to decline," Charles said, making no attempt to blunt the statement, "we'd need mechanisms in place. Financial power of attorney, for instance, allows—" Enough, Leo blurted with a sudden flush, as if something in the phrasing had finally embarrassed him. Then more softly, "Mom, we don't want to fight. We want what's best for you." It is a particular cruelty learned young that allows a person to use "we want what's best" as a weapon. "What's best for me," I said carefully, "is to live where I still know where every light switch is in the dark." Chloe reached for my hand and placed hers atop it, cool, curated. "I understand this is scary." "It isn't," I said, and felt how flatly true it was. "It is insulting." For a few beats, the room remembered how to be quiet. Outside, a stroller clicked past on the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, a dog discovered again that it had a voice. Marjorie recovered first. "We've taken the liberty of scheduling a tour for Tuesday. No commitments, just a look." "You took the liberty," I said, "with my time." Charles slid the folder an inch closer. "And we've sketched a basic financial roadmap. If you approve, we can connect you with a trusted attorney to formalize things." "I have an attorney," I said. Mr. Harrison's name did not cross my lips, but the syllables of it steadied me like a handrail. Chloe's smile thinned. "Of course you do. Still, it might be easier for Leo if—" "For Leo?" I asked, and the gentleness left my voice so completely that everyone heard the absence. "Is this meeting about Leo's ease?" Color crept into Leo's cheeks. "Mom, come on. We're trying to avoid unpleasantness," Marjorie said carefully. "Families sometimes have to make hard calls. If someone can't make sound decisions—" "You're talking about declaring me incompetent," I said. It wasn't a question. Chloe inhaled a shallow, practiced breath. "We're talking about planning. Say the word," I said, "the one you say for closed doors and group texts." No one spoke. The house waited with me. "It would be better for everyone," Charles said, finally, a man who values the comfort of conclusions, "if this were amicable." "And cheaper," I said, matching his tone. That earned me the smallest flicker of respect in his eyes, the acknowledgement reserved for an opponent who knows the rules. I rose. The room rose a beat later, a reluctant chorus. I did not pick up the brochures. I did not touch the folder. I looked at my son, my once small, knee-scarred boy, and I searched his face for the soft-bellied kindness that had driven him to share half his sandwich with a classmate who'd forgotten hers. I could not find it, or I could not find enough of it to matter here. "I will not move," I said. "I will not sign. I will not tour. If you bring this up again, bring it to my attorney." A quiet, quick anger flared in Chloe's eyes. She extinguished it with a blink. "We're only trying to prevent a crisis." "You stage one," I said, and opened the door. They filed out with the complicated choreography of people pretending not to retreat. On the porch, Marjorie paused. "You'll think about it," she said, as if my decision were a misfired synapse and not a completed thought. "I already did," I said, and closed the door gently, a luxury I denied myself the satisfaction of slamming. I stood in the hallway until their voices faded and the car engine coughed and the street returned to its ordinary theater. Then I went to the kitchen where the macaron box sat unsullied, and I opened it as if it were a trap. Pistachio, rose, lemon. I chose none. I poured tea and did not drink it. When the quiet settled in properly, I took out my address book, the real one, the paper one pages edged with time, and I ran a finger down names that had faded and names that had been crossed out and names that had been lucky. Mr. Harrison's number was written twice, once in his tidy hand from years ago, and once in mine darker, as if I had known then that the future would require wait. He picked up on the second ring. Mrs. Vance. Mr. Harrison, I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. I need you to do something for me. What do you need? I want a full picture, I said, of Leo's finances, of Chloe's, debts, creditors, loans, landlords, anything with a dollar sign or a signature. I don't want to be blindsided again. There was no judgment in his silence, only competence. I'll engage a private investigator, and I'll start pulling public records. We'll proceed discreetly. And Mr. Harrison, yes, draft the documents we discussed just in case. Plan B, he said, naming what I had not understood. When I hung up, the house uncoiled in relief. Somewhere the radiator clicked. A floorboard made the small yielding sound old wood makes when it decides to forgive the day. 2 mornings later, Mr. Harrison called with the first wave of findings. The numbers were not just bad. They were a topology of bad peaks and ravines of irresponsibility, late notices compounding interest, minimum payments masquerading as solutions. The wedding budget alone could have paid a nurse's salary for a year. The cars were leased. The apartment was behind. The credit cards were blooming like invasive vines. And layered atop the mess were phone logs, emails, inquiries, power of attorney forms bookmarked, notes on home equity lines, conversations with bank managers who specialized in senior transitions. What about Leo? I asked finally, because the wound, being old, would not stop bleeding just because I wished it to. Is there any trace of him trying to stop this? Mr. Harrison is a man who measures even when measuring hurts. I see accommodation, he said softly, not resistance. Thank you, I said. Please send me copies of everything and prepare the cancellations, the guarantees, the transfers, all of it. You're certain? Yes. Then I'll have a courier bring the first set of papers tomorrow. After I hung up, I went to the closet and pulled down the shoebox where I keep letters that deserved better than drawers. Your father's handwriting stared up at me from a card edged in blue. If anything ever requires you to choose between kindness and self-respect, he had written the year Leo turned 12, choose both. If you can't have both, choose self-respect. You can rebuild kindness on it later. I placed the card back and sat on the floor and let myself cry, not the messy, hiccuping sobs of shock, but the quiet, seamed tears of recognition. Grief in its older age is precise. It knows exactly where to land. The next days unfurled with the mechanical grace of a plan documents reviewed, transfers scheduled to cease, guarantees revoked. The scaffolding I had held in place for 3 years unbolted piece by piece until the structure of their lives would have to stand on its own or learn belatedly the principles of load bearing. I did not tell Leo, I did not warn him. Warnings are a kind of enabling when the ship is already pointed at the reef. Instead, I baked. It is a particular mercy of the body that it craves ritual when the mind is at war. I baked bread and froze it in halves. I kneaded dough and thought of spines of strength, of the way flour needs time and pressure to become something that holds. I cleaned the gutters myself on a bright, stubborn Thursday just to hear the ladder wobble and to remind my legs that they still belonged to me. And because the heart is nothing if not treacherous, I imagined against all evidence a version of Sunday where Leo called and said, "Mom, I'm sorry. Chloe went too far. I went too far. I just want you." I rehearsed my forgiveness. I tried it on like an old coat. It fit until it didn't. 2 weeks later, the party invitation arrived, thick cardstock, embossed, ambitious. Join us to celebrate Leo's 35th. I stared at the serifed letters and felt the future's breath on my neck. On the afternoon of the party, I took extra care dressing as if I could armor myself with elegance. The cream silk slid over my shoulders like a memory of who I had been before the math of their need began to subtract me. I chose my husband's watch small, unassuming its face a circle of time that had for us always been honest. When I arrived at the Northwood Club, the valet opened my door with the deference reserved for people who are sure of their place. For a moment I let the illusion touch me. The lobby smelled of polished wood and lemon oil. Laughter stitched the air. A string quartet tested its instruments in a corner, a song trying to remember itself. I found my seat, the one marked guest of honor, and I sat very straight. If they were going to make a stage of this, I could be an actor. And then Leo took the microphone and the chandeliers threw fire across the room, and the words he said next made my heart attempt foolishly to mend itself. And then Chloe stepped up beside him and asked with a voice like velvet draped over a blade for the keys to my life. What followed the wine, the stain, the deliberate spectacle of clumsiness felt less like an attack and more like a proof, the final theorem in a long, cynical equation. I stood, I left, I made the call I had promised myself I would not hesitate to make. Mr. Harrison, I said in the dark corridor outside the ballroom, my reflection a pale flame in the glass. Bring Plan B. It's time. 30 minutes later, when the doors parted and the quiet, competent man with the briefcase stepped into the amber-lit hall, the air in the room changed. People feel it when something inevitable enters the scene. Even the quartet fell silent, mid-note, hanging like a breath before the verdict. Chloe's face hardened and then smoothed. Leo's eyes found mine, and for one cruel second I saw my boy again, small afraid, standing in a kitchen doorway, with an apology trembling on his lip. But he said nothing. And so I did what mothers in fairy tales never do enough. I chose myself. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Harrison announced. I apologize for the interruption, but there are urgent financial matters we must address with Mr. and Mrs. Vance. I stood beside him, not behind. The room tightened around us like a drum. The next minutes would change the shape of our family forever, but I realized with a clarity that felt like fresh water that the family had already been broken. This was merely when the lights came up. As Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase and withdrew the first document, the cancellation of the lease guarantee, the club's chandelier crystals threw a scatter of cold stars across Chloe's immaculate dress. She did not yet know that spectacle can be a trap too, that if you build your conclusions on a stage, someone else may choose to deliver theirs there as well. Financial guarantee, Leo repeated as if learning a new language too late. For 3 years, I said, I was your oxygen. He blinked, stunned like a diver who has just discovered the ocean ends. And the monthly transfers, Mr. Harrison continued, but I barely heard him. I was watching my son understand. I was watching the arithmetic of entitlement collapse under the weight of subtraction. Chloe turned to me, the mask slipping, the precision cracking. You can't do this, she said. You're. She searched for the right word, then settled on the wrong one. You're a librarian. Appearances, I said, and almost smiled, are a hobby I never took up. Mr. Harrison read the rest. The cost of the party, the terms of revocation, the amended will. The guests went still in their chairs, unblinking like people who have stumbled upon a scene in a play and are too embarrassed to get up and walk out. A ripple of sympathy touched me from corners of the room I would not have expected it to occupy. It didn't matter. I hadn't come to be pitied. I had come to finish a sentence. When it was done, the room didn't exhale so much as stall engines flooding. The manager approached professional and unsentimental to request alternative payment arrangements. The music died completely. Someone coughed. Someone else laughed, a small, shocked cough of a laugh that did not survive its own birth. Leo reached for me then, and for a dizzying half second I wanted to put my hand in his, just to feel how once it had been mine to hold. Mom, he said, tears carving fresh lines into his face. Please don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said, and felt the truth of it resonate in my bones. I'm undoing what should never have been required in the first place. He let his hand fall. I turned and left with Mr. Harrison, the doors closing behind us, with the quiet finality of a decision long deferred and finally made. In the shadowed hallway, the air felt cooler, honestly. Mr. Harrison tucked the briefcase beneath his arm. Are you all right, Mrs. Vance? I considered the question, the weight of it. Not yet, I said, but I will be. And when we stepped out into the night, the city, which had not cared one way or another about my private war, flickered back at me. Somewhere a siren stitched the distance together. Somewhere a child refused to go to bed. Somewhere a mother made a choice she hoped would teach a lesson she would not live to see learned. I tightened my shawl around my shoulders, not from cold, but from a ritual sense of completion. Behind us, muffled through glass and distance voices, rose negotiations, pleased the recalibration of a night designed to celebrate one man's becoming and instead forced to reckon with another woman's refusal to disappear. At the curb, Mr. Harrison held the car door open. Before I slid in, I looked up at the Northwood Club's facade, all stone and old money and promises, and I thought of the first time my husband had brought me here a lifetime ago. We were so young, the future seemed like a country we both had visas for. Drive me home, I said. Yes, Mrs. Vance. As the city passed the windows in deliberate ribbons of light, I pressed my palm to the smooth face of my husband's watch and felt for the first time in months that time was again something I could live inside without fear of drowning. Tomorrow would bring interviews and headlines and lawyers and consequences. But tonight belonged to the exact shape of this relief, to the long, elegant spine of a decision that had finally found its feet. And somewhere deep under the noise of it all, I could hear the creak of an old ladder and rain beginning, and a small boy insisting the sky was too loud. Not anymore, I said aloud to no one and watched the city say okay in 1,000 lit windows. 6 months had passed since the night I stepped out of the Northwood Club, the night my silence finally ended and my dignity took its first breath after years of suffocation. In those first weeks, the world seemed quieter. The phone barely rang. My mornings stretched longer than usual, the house echoing with a kind of emptiness that at times felt unbearable, at times peaceful. I woke early as I always had and brewed my coffee, but there was no one left to call, no one waiting on the other end of my kindness. And yet, there was relief. Grief and freedom are strange siblings, they arrive hand in hand. One makes you weep for what's lost, the other makes you breathe again. I learned to live with both. It started with the calls from the press, soft voices at first cautious and curious. Somehow, one of the guests from that night had recorded the entire confrontation on their phone. Within days, the video spread like wildfire, the frail old woman standing firm before her son and daughter in law, the calm defiance in her voice, the stunned silence of the crowd. They called it the Eleanor Vance moment. Talk shows debated it, podcasts analyzed it. Think. Pieces praised it as a turning point in how society perceives elder dignity. My mailbox filled with letters from strangers, widows, veterans, retirees, all thanking me for saying what they hadn't been able to. One woman wrote, I gave my son my house because he said he needed space for his family. He sold it 2 months later and left me in a nursing home. You gave me courage to speak again. Another said, you reminded me that being old doesn't mean being silent. I hadn't planned on being anyone's symbol. I had simply reached the edge of what I could endure. But life, I've learned, sometimes takes your pain and plants a seed in it, and if you water it with truth, something grows. The public wanted to know everything about Leo, about Chloe, about the aftermath. I didn't speak at first. I let the facts speak for themselves, the bankruptcy filings, the lawsuits, the foreclosures, the silence of their friends. Eventually, though, I agreed to one interview, a televised one, quiet and measured, hosted by a journalist known for listening more than asking. The studio was soft lit, the air cold from the hum of cameras. She looked at me across the table, eyes kind but probing. Mrs. Vance, she began, your story has inspired millions. People see you as a hero, but it also cost you your son. Do you regret what you did? The question landed heavy. I looked into the camera, not at her, through the lens, to the millions who might be sitting alone in their living rooms, wondering if standing up for themselves would also mean standing alone. I don't think of it as revenge, I said slowly. I think of it as remembering who I am. The host nodded, encouraging me to go on. For years, I believed love meant sacrifice, that if you gave enough, forgave enough, stayed quiet enough, things would return to what they were. But love without respect becomes servitude, and servitude, even to your own child, is not love. I felt the lump rising in my throat, but I didn't look away. Leo is still my son. Nothing can change that. But a mother's duty is not to be a mirror for her child's greed. It is to be a compass for his soul. And sometimes the needle must break before it can point north again. The studio was silent when I finished. No applause, no music, just the weight of truth hanging in the air. That night, I didn't sleep much. The interview went viral again. My name became a headline, then a cause. Charities reached out, lawyers offered collaborations, advocacy groups invited me to speak. For a time, it all felt surreal. I was 70 years old, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living with intention. Mr. Harrison helped me establish the Vance Foundation for Elder Dignity, a fund dedicated to protecting seniors from financial exploitation. We offered legal counseling workshops, even emergency grants. In our first year, we helped over 300 people reclaim their homes and autonomy. Sometimes they sent photos, an old man standing proudly in front of his small apartment, a widow smiling beside her garden letters scrawled with gratitude that smelled faintly of hope. Those moments stitched my heart back together. As for Leo and Chloe, the silence between us grew thicker than any wall. The legal claims they tried to mount crumbled quickly frivolous, the judge had called them. They were ordered to repay my attorney's fees, an amount they couldn't afford. They lost their apartment, their cars, their credit. The glamorous life they'd built on borrowed illusions came undone, thread by thread. And still no apology came. Not a word, not a note, not a tear. Until one evening, nearly a year later, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But something, perhaps the ghost of a mother's hope, made me lift the receiver. "Mom," he said. The sound of his voice, older, strained, hollowed by consequences. "Leo," I whispered. He hesitated. I heard him breathe shallow, uncertain. "We lost everything," he said finally. "Chloe's gone. She left last month. I can't find work. No one wants to hire someone with bad credit and worse press." I closed my eyes. The ache was still there, not anger anymore, just sorrow. "Mom, please," he said, the word breaking midair. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need help." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to reach through the line, back through time, and cradle the boy he used to be. But I also knew the truth. Help without humility is poison. "Leo," I said softly, the hardest part of growing up is realizing that no one else can save you. You have to start where you are, not where you wish you were. He was silent for a long time. Then quietly, "You care more about your pride than your own son." I almost laughed, not out of mockery, but at the bitter irony of it. "My dignity," I said, "is not the opposite of love. It's the foundation of it. And if you had learned that lesson earlier, maybe we wouldn't be here." He hung up without another word. That night I cried. But not for him, not entirely. I cried for the years lost, for the small moments we'd never get back. For the lullabies, the scraped knees, the laughter that once filled these walls. Grief, I've learned, never truly leaves. It simply changes shape from storm to shadow, from ache to acceptance. 2 years later, I received another letter. The envelope was thin, the handwriting shaky. "Eleanor, you don't know me, but I think you might want to know this. My name is Sarah. I'm friends with Chloe. She's been living in a small town upstate, working at a boutique. She had a son, your grandson Oliver. She told me once that she hoped he'd grow up to be nothing like her. I thought you should know." I stared at the words for a long time. Oliver, a name, a child, a piece of Leo still walking the earth. I contacted Mr. Harrison again, and together we set up a trust fund, small but steady, for Oliver's education, managed by the foundation, locked until his 18th birthday. He would never know it came from me, or maybe one day he would. Maybe he'd seek out the truth buried beneath the ashes of his parents' mistakes. That thought brought me peace. Now, in the twilight of my years, I often sit on the balcony at dusk, watching the city lights bloom like constellations across the skyline. I write letters I never send to my husband, to Leo, to the woman I used to be. Sometimes I reread the one I wrote the night after the party. It ends with these words: "They wanted my house, but I discovered my home was never made of walls. It was made of the person I had forgotten to be." There's a strange beauty in the endings. They hurt, yes, but they also clarify, like polishing glass until you can finally see yourself again. I am 71 now. I move a little slower. My hands tremble when I pour tea, but my heart is steady and my reflection no longer frightens me. People sometimes ask if I would take Leo back if he ever came with true remorse. The answer is yes, but only if he comes as the man he was meant to be, not the boy who tried to buy love with betrayal. Forgiveness, after all, is not a door you leave open for anyone to walk through. It's a gate you unlock only when both sides have earned the key. Tonight, as I watch the stars scatter across the city sky, I think of all the women and men who wrote to me whispering their thanks into the void. I think of Oliver growing somewhere far away, untouched by the bitterness that once poisoned this family. And I think of my husband's words written long ago in a birthday card: kindness and dignity. Eleanor, if you can't have both, choose dignity. You'll find kindness again someday. I smile because I did. And as the night deepens, I whisper softly to the dark, not in anger, not in regret, but in peace. I am home.